Dr. Drackley, it's an honor to have you here with us today.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
We're here today with Dr. Jim Drackley from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. He's a professor of animal sciences, and we ran a trial with him studying the production effects on lactating dairy cows that were fed Galaxis Frontier. The bulk of your research and the stuff that you've been working on over the past decades at University of Illinois, at UIUC, has been around sort of nutritional management strategies for dairy cattle, for calf health and calf rearing. I guess, can you tell us about the evolution of your career over all this time and kind of how your research interests have evolved?
Yeah. So I started off right out of graduate school working on transition-related projects. That's actually continued my entire career, various aspects of...
Who did you work with for your graduate education?
Jerry Young and Don Bites at Iowa State University.
Okay.
So I worked on ketosis and fatty liver when I was in graduate school.
That makes sense.
And so that continued on the interest in the transition period. So that's stayed with me my whole career. It's kind of a progression of things in that arena. I had the opportunity fairly early on to get introduced to the calf nutrition world, and I didn't have any pre-existing interest in that, but the opportunity came, and I've spent most of my career doing calf nutrition work as well. And there's been other things. I did quite a bit of work with supplemental fats and early in my career. That kind of waned mid-career. As the industry evolved and changed. And I've done some other more basic metabolism work and just some more general feeding work, kind of like the native trial that we did.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I wanted to ask you is what really stood out to you about Galaxis Frontier that made you interested in studying it?
Yeah.
I mean, we're in a world where other live microbe products that are available to people have been, traditionally different strains of yeast or lactobacilli, or Bacillus subtilis, different strains of Bacillus subtilis. And so we were curious what features really stood out to you when you heard about our product initially, Galaxis
So
Frontier.
when Howard Green, who was working with you, came to me about the possibility of running a trial, and I was aware of your company but didn't know the more details about it at that time. And as I learned more about the nature of what you're doing, I just found that to be a really exciting way to approach the problem and innovative technology. And so that's kind of what drew me to the project.
Yeah, it makes sense to feed cow microbes to cows.
Yeah.
Right. So we ran a study with you in 2020. This was a study to test the production effects of Galaxis Frontier in lactating dairy cows. Can you briefly touch on the results that you saw in that trial?
Yeah. So one of the responses was an increase in energy-corrected milk. The response over time was different between the Galaxis Frontier and the controls. And also an improvement in feed efficiency, which we saw consistently over the trial. One of the other findings that came out of that was the understanding that the time in the lactation cycle when the cow started on the product was a big factor in the magnitude of the response. That the earlier the cows started on the trial, or started earlier in their lactation that they started on trial, the better the response in energy-corrected milk was. Yeah.
Why do you think that is? I mean, that's something that we're starting to realize is a trend across, the bulk of the research we've done is that the cows that start on product early in their lactation, so the days in milk basically at which you start kind of matters to the production response. You get a bigger response when you start in early lactation. Why do you think that is?
I think in general, most products, if you start early in lactation when the cow is still building up to her peak milk and peak dry matter intake, you have a better chance of seeing a larger response because you are making a bigger jump in the nutrient supply relative to demands earlier in lactation. And so I think it makes sense that the earlier in lactation you start this, the better the response would be versus later lactation when the milk yield is on the downward trend and it's harder to influence at that time.
We've run studies with Dr. Jose Santos at University of Florida, with Tom Overton at Cornell, with Mike Vandehar at Michigan State University, Dr. Lago at Dairy Experts. When you look at those results, there are some differences, there are some similarities. What were the sort of overall takeaways that you saw that were the same versus different?
Yeah, I think one of the things that seems to be fairly consistent is that at least a numerical improvement in feed efficiency. Some studies showed an improvement in milk production, some studies did not, but the feed efficiency response seemed to be fairly consistent. In some cases like ours, that was caused more by the decrease in dry matter intake that we saw, so non-significant decreases in intake and increases in milk production. So the studies were variable, but in general, the feed efficiency response seems to be the same as ours. The diets were different, of course, between sites, but really generally similar in composition based on corn silage and alfalfa, with the exception of the California diet that was kind of an outlier in terms of the diet composition.
We're feeding 5 grams per head every day into the feed, and that's a small volume, small mass. It is about, in the tens of millions, hundreds of millions, even billions of live cells that are being added into the rumen. But overall, that's pretty small number of bacterial cells in the context of the rumen. And so how can such a small number of microbes in this giant rumen ecosystem have such an effect, have this reproducible feed efficiency response in animals?
So skeptics will say it's like spitting in the ocean. But I think that there's real ways in which the relatively small number of microorganisms can influence the larger population. So if the population that you're adding becomes established and starts reproducing, the numbers are going to be higher than that small amount that you're adding every day. So that's one factor. The products of these bacteria and fungi may stimulate the growth of other microorganisms, change the cooperative or competitive nature between different species, and end up with a more favorable or more balanced profile of the whole microbiome.
Right.
So I think it seems hard to believe, but I think there's logical reasons why it can work.
This is one example of a microbiome-based product. We built this product based off of microbes that are already native to the rumen, right? And that you didn't have to fight those colonization factors, right? They're already established.
Right.
And that's led to this whole new world of microbial products that we like to think that we're driving, that we are driving basically the field in. But you're a professor of ruminant sciences. You're probably exposed to a lot of different products that come onto the market for dairy cows. And I wanted to get a sense for, how have you seen microbiome sciences in dairy cows, in ruminants, progress since the turn of the 21st century, and where do you think we're going with all these sort of microbiome-based strategies in lactating dairy animals?
I think in my career, the whole area of probiotics and prebiotics and all of the different supplements that have been designed for improving efficiency or improving performance has gone from something that used to be viewed very, very skeptically, I think, as having any likely effects, to a very sophisticated understanding that we really can influence the microbial population. So, I mean, there's a host of different products on the market. Again, they're trying to manipulate responses in the rumen by the end products or growth factors that are being produced by live organisms, or things like yeast culture, where you have not only the organisms but the culture medium that they're grown in. So there's a whole cocktail of things that are being added. There's a huge number of different strategies. So I think that as time has gone on and the science has accumulated, we see a pretty good story, and there's a good mechanistic basis behind many of these products. I think your product, or the technology behind your product, is unique because you are using actual rumen species to provide the probiotic effect, and I think that's pretty exciting because you're picking the best of those species that have effects that we can measure in terms of performance. May not understand the total mechanism yet, but I think the technology is really exciting. Some areas where I think there's real potential, the transition area, I think is a logical candidate. Baby calves also, and the developing rumen microbiome, and how that may speed the development of the microbial population, perhaps improve digestibilities of forage in the young calf. So I think those are a couple of areas, in addition to the ongoing work with lactating cows, that would have some potential.
Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Drackley. It's been very insightful getting to talk with you about this.
My pleasure.